Hello and welcome to Talk D93, Community Consolidated School District 93's podcast, hosted by me, Superintendent Dr. David Hill. In it, I sit down from time to time with key figures who impact our district to have conversations about specific CCS D93 programs, services, roles, events, history, and more. Today, I'm excited to welcome Jonathan Zimmermann, CCS D93's Assistant Superintendent for Teaching, Learning, and Innovation, for a conversation about standards-based grading. For those who don't know, standards-based grading is the system that School District 93 uses to help students and parents understand a student's academic achievement rather than the traditional grading system that many of our parents experienced when they were in school. I'm excited for Mr. Zimmermann to join me to shed a bit more light on just what standards-based grading is and how it works. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here and to talk about standards-based grading and how it works in District 93.
Excellent. So before we can really delve into standards-based grading, I think it's important that we understand the first part of the phrase standards. Jonathan, can you explain what are standards?
Sometimes the word standards is also referenced to as learning targets or kind of the learning standards or the learning descriptors that students are working toward. All of the standards we use are from the state of Illinois, the Illinois learning standards for all of our courses. So each class has a set of standards or learning targets that students work on, and those are targets that are meant to be met by the end of that grade level. So each year, there's a new set of standards in the classes that students work on and work toward together with their teachers, together collaborative as a class. For example, to give you some examples of what we mean by standards, a first grade math standard that we work on is use addition and subtraction within 20 to solve word problems. So that's something by the end of the year we'd want students in first grade to be able to accomplish and achieve. At sixth grade, to give you a comparison, one of their standards is use variables to represent numbers and write expressions when solving real-world or mathematical problems. So you can see there are rigorous and challenging standards for each grade level that kind of align to their age-appropriate and developmentally appropriate targets for learning. So that's kind of a brief explanation of what standards are. There are many standards in each class, and each class works on those throughout the school year to reach that end-of-year target. And we, again, consider meeting those standards to be a really high bar for students. These are challenging, rigorous standards that we work on with our students.
So the goal is that the student achieves the standard near the end of the year as they're progressing throughout the year.
That's right. That's our goal for students, that by the end of the year they meet those learning targets at their grade level.
Okay. So it would be unrealistic maybe in some situations that students are meeting those targets after the first trimester.
We certainly wouldn't expect many students to meet early in the year. It's really a learning progression working toward those standards. There might be some work that students need to do to kind of get some of the foundational skills to work up to that standard by the end of the year. So we look at it as a learning progression toward the standard that we work on throughout the year, and with that goal of meeting the standard by the end of the year.
Okay, so knowing that and knowing a little bit more now about the standards, can you tell us broadly, what is standards-based grading?
So standards-based grading is really looking at the learning and the teaching that we do aligned to standards. So it all starts with the standard, and that we think about all the teaching we do and all the learning is working on a standard or a target. But then when we report how students are doing, we really want to report to how they're doing on those standards we're working on. And that's where we come up with the idea of standards-based grading, that we're sharing how they're progressing and learning on a specific standard rather than just how they're scoring on an assignment. We're always trying to connect back to, when we report on student progress and grading, report back to the standard that we're working on. So it's really looking at what level they're performing at in relation to that standard versus just a collection of points or completion of assignments. Our standards-based grading is meant to focus on how are they really doing toward those standards that we are working on in that class and trying to achieve by the end of the school year.
Okay, so that's a good explanation. So if I'm a parent, when I get the first trimester report card, what I see on that report card is telling me how my student is progressing on the standard.
Correct. Right. So that's really showing where they are at that time in their progress toward learning that end of year standard.
Can you tell us a little more about the grading scale that's used with standards-based grading?
Sure. So we use in District 93, starting in the 21-22 school year, we use a 4-level scale, and we refer to as levels because each level indicates the level of performance toward that standard. So that scale, the highest level on that scale is exceeds, which would show where a student is kind of taking that standard and able to go in more depth, kind of take that standard and apply it to new situations, do some more extensive work with that standard than simply meeting the standard, which is a rigorous task in itself. Meeting the standard would show really a solid, consistent evidence of really having a grasp and a firm mastery of that standard. That's our 3rd level, which is that meeting standards. Right below that is progressing, which is the place where many students are going to be throughout the year. And that's where students are really showing some partial understandings of the full standard, making progress toward that full standard, but maybe not yet fully and solidly and consistently hitting that standard. And then we also have a level called limited progress, which just means there's students at that level are really still working on the basic foundational skills that are going to set them up for success in getting up to the standards, continue to progress, and eventually meet the standards. So those are the 4 levels that we have on our scale, and that's our scale starting the 21-22 school year. One kind of distinction there, one point there we want to make is that we really look at that scale as meeting the standard is really a good achievement for students. That's what we really want students to do. Our expectation is not that all students get to level 4. The expectation is that all students meet the standards. Mm-hmm. Some students may be able to exceed and go beyond that, but really when you look at this level scale, kind of different than maybe ways we've thought about grading scales in the past, the target is for students to meet and be at that level on the scale.
Mm-hmm. And many of our standards, as you mentioned earlier, have substandards within them. So a child may theoretically be doing pretty well on some of those substandards, but has not mastered the entire standard yet. Is that an accurate statement?
That's exactly correct. So one of the things that teachers kind of track as they're working with students is how they're doing on those substandards and those steps that lead to mastery of the full standard. And so in that case, if they're just doing some of those steps that lead them to the standard, they'd still be scoring in what we'd see the P level or the progressing level on our scale. And that's certainly okay. That's how they're getting to the standard. So teachers kind of monitor how they're doing on those pieces as they're building up to the full standard. Mm-hmm. And that's to be expected and should be something that we should see kind of across the board, that students are progressing and working on those substandards as they're working toward full mastery of the standard.
Thank you. So when I was in school a long time ago, it was A, B, and C, and so on. So how is this an improvement over the system that I had when I was going to school?
When we think about the traditional grading scale and the A, B, C, and kind of the experience many of us had going through school, it was really more of a percentage-based scale. You got that grade based on a certain percentage of points that you received. And typically those points could be gained from doing a variety of things, variety of assignments, and not necessarily identifying how they're doing and reporting to each specific standard. So when we think about a standards-based grade scale, one thing that's different is we don't have an overall math grade. We don't have a percentage of all the points together, how a student did in math. We instead report to the specific standards and say, how are they progressing on those specific standards versus what's your overall in a previous system that many of us knew of you got an A, B, C in math, right? So that's one distinction. The other thing to realize, not only that it's the focus on the specific standards, but also that we try to be very clear about what we're reporting to, not only around the standard, but if you know in a ABC system, oftentimes there'd be other things that might go into those points. Maybe students would get points for doing extra work, or maybe they'd get like extra credit, or maybe they might get some points for participation in class. And other things might be included in that overall class grade, with standards-based grading, what we try to do is be very clear about what we're reporting to, and we include things because they're important, things like work habits, like participation in class, things like completion of work and turning in your work. Those are things that we consider work habits, but we report those separately and talk about how are students doing on those things, and then we identify specific standards that are in that class to say how are they doing on those academic standards and what are they showing us in their performance on those. So we still report to those things. Those things are still all important, but oftentimes in the previous scale, all those things would kind of go into one bucket and report to that whole class. And now it's not about kind of collecting points for the class. It's about what evidence do we have that students are actually meeting a standard, not just kind of getting points and completing assignments and getting a total number to get you to an A, B, C, or whatever you're shooting for.
Mm-hmm. So Jonathan, based on that explanation, it sounds like the standards-based grading system is a much more accurate method to determine where a student's progress is on a state-mandated standard. Would that be an accurate statement?
Yeah, yes, I think that's a good way to speak of it, that we're trying to be very accurate in reporting to how their students are performing those standards. And we look at things like rubrics, other pieces of evidence that tell us what would be a good example that would say students are meeting, and we can kind of have a better consistency in terms of saying, how can we tell if a student has reached this level? And we can describe that and be fairly clear about we have not only a common standard from the state, but then as a district we continue to work on and continue to build on among teams and continue to build over time as a district on having consistency of what that looks like and some examples of what that would be as evidence that a student is meeting that standard.
Okay. Thank you for the explanation. So Jonathan, obviously this is new, and we think it's very important that our parents are involved in their child's progress. How can our parents track their child's progress with standards-based grading?
It's very important for us that our parents can track what their students are doing, and that we have a good system to communicate with parents how students are progressing toward those standards. We have, in the 21-22 school year, added parent portal and teacher ease for parents to be able to see their students' progress toward specific standards. And in this system, what we really want to encourage parents to do is to be in the system regularly. The system is not built simply to create a report card. The system is built to communicate consistently and over time with parents, so we can be partnering together, teachers and parents, in the progress their students are making toward the standards. So in the Teacher Ease portal, parents can see individual standards that have been assessed and what assignments link to those standards and what level students performed on those assignments. So you'll see those letters I referenced in the scale. You might see an M next to an assignment, or an E, or a P, which will show, based on that standard and that assignment, what evidence the student showed in terms of how they're performing toward that standard. So you can look at specific assignments and dig into those specific standards which are listed there that they're working on. And you can also then track things like students' performance over time on a particular standard, not only in a certain trimester, but over time throughout the year, and see if there's certain standards in each course. You can get a sense of what standards students are doing really well at, and which are ones they're still progressing on or still continuing to do some work on and learn through. You'll also find in that parent portal scores and information about student work habits. We mentioned that that's something else we report on. That's another piece of communication in that tool that indicates here's some things that we think are really important to student learning, habits that really help you as a learner to have success in school and in life. So things like completing work on time, participating, setting goals, things like that will also be reported in the system, so parents can see, are there any of those things that my child is struggling with, or things they're doing really well that's helping them to succeed. Throughout the year, teachers continue to put information into the gradebook, and that data continues to build throughout the year. So we encourage parents to continue to go in and check the parent portal throughout the year, and you'll continue to see more and more data as the year goes on and as you continue to follow your students' progress throughout the school year.
So Jonathan, it sounds like a very robust system that allows our parents to really kind of be partnering with us on their students' progress. It also sounds like, from what you said, that the standards as they're taught throughout the year, more and more will go into the grade book as those skills are learned, and parents can kind of track that to make sure that they know how their student is doing.
Yes, absolutely. And I think what they'll find in there as more and more data goes in and as you get more comfortable, you'll find different ways to look at information and kind of analyze how your student is doing. There is a smartphone app that gives you kind of a quick glance at some things. There's also availability to look in the system through a website or a desktop portal. And in each one, you can kind of dig into that information as far as you're interested in going, and you can look at things from different aspects. In some cases, I know there's parents who I've talked to who like to just see the list of all the assignments the student has done in the class and see it from that view. That's one way you can view it. As you get more comfortable, some people want to say, just show me the standards and how they're doing each standard. You can look at it that way. So there's the system's robust and has lots of information, and then you as a parent can look at what's meaningful to you or what's the information I'm looking for as you go through it. When you go on to the district website and the parent portal section, there are some supports also for parents there too, if they're looking for how do I make the most sense of this tool to understand my students' learning progress.
Sounds like an excellent tool. So you kind of touched on this a little bit with the portal on the website, but what should a parent do if they have questions about their child's progress with standards-based grading?
So as I said, if there's a question kind of about how to work in the portal and find information, certainly start with the district website and some of the video supports and document supports there. But if your question is really about, I see this score and I see this assignment, and I want to know a little bit more about how my child is progressing or what these scores in the gradebook mean, it's important to communicate and continue the communication with your child's teacher. This is really, again, the goal of a standards-based learning system is to have consistent communication about student learning. And so when you're in the system looking at standards-based grades and have questions or want to understand better about your child's performance, that's a great time to reach out to your child's teacher and continue to be in conversation to make sure you understand where your child is performing, because that's really the goal. It's about having useful information so we can know what the next steps are to take. Again, it's very common and acceptable that students might be getting a P or progressing as they're working toward grade level standards. So that's not something to be concerned about, but it might be something to have a conversation about with your child's teacher about what are the things they need to work on or what are the next steps in terms of their learning progress.
This has been a wonderful conversation. I think we've provided some information to our families on standards, the updated grading scale, and standards-based grading as a whole. Jonathan, I want to thank you so much for joining me here and explaining much more about standards-based grading.
Thank you. It's great to be part of this conversation. It's exciting to be able to have systems that help us communicate and partner with parents in terms of their students' academic progress.
Thank you. Talk D93 listeners, please subscribe to Talk D93 on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or Spotify, and don't miss a thing from CCS D93 by following us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. You can also find me on Twitter at drhilld93. Join us next time for more from CCS D93. Thank you.